When you're in the big leagues, speaking your mind can attract a whole new set of fans, or just leave you jobless. While the league claims they celebrate players as role models and change makers, that comes with a catch. It has to be Adam Silver approved, and Enes Kanter's price for speaking his mind was the career he spent his life working towards. Before Enes Kanter Freedom became known for his outspoken political statements, he was simply a hardworking, tough-minded big man who knew exactly how to fit in on any team he joined. A classic certified big. Kanter wasn't flashy with dazzling handles or game-winning threes, but he owned the painted area. He crashed the boards with the best of them while bruising and finessing his way into a double-double every other night. Coaches trusted him. Teammates counted on him. Kanter was exactly the kind of player who carved out a solid, respectable NBA career by knowing his role, hitting the shots that came in the pace of the offense, and bringing energy off the bench or starting when called upon. So it's really unfortunate what would happen to his promising NBA career. Drafted with the third pick in the 2011 NBA draft by the Utah Jazz, Kanter quickly made a name for himself as a reliable center who could rebound at will and score efficiently in the post and mid-range area. He wasn't going to be a generational talent or anything like that, but his post bag was top of the line and he was reliable for what he was good for. Over the years, Kanter found himself bouncing from team to team like a homie hopper, chilling with the Mormons in Utah, helping Russ milk some stats down in OKC. He went to Portland, he went to New York, and eventually to Boston. Always bringing some grit and grind, solid rebounding, and a post-up bucket when the rest of your offense was stalled. His offensive game was pretty solid, with career averages of 11 points and 8 rebounds, with numerous Sixth Man of the Year campaigns throughout his tenure. To sum it all up, you wouldn't complain if this guy was suiting up for your team every single night. He always played with heart. Defensively, he was totally shit, but really this guy was more of a weapon you had on your bench to spark quick offense, then put back in your starter. He was a good teammate according to many, never complaining really publicly, and earned respect for his commitment to the grind amongst many superstar teammates. This was a guy who knew his lane and stuck to it, until he swerved into the lane that would eventually crumble his entire career. His voice, already loud on the court, grew louder off of it, and it wasn't about basketball. It was about human rights, freedom, and justice for his homeland, the butterball of Europe, Turkey. Kanter was born and raised in Turkey, a country ruled by some man named... yeah, I'm not even gonna try to say that. Anyways, Enes wasn't at all pleased with the way that things were ran, and decided to speak up using his platform from his NBA fans and following. Kanter was highly critical of his leadership, especially following the 2013 Turkish corruption scandal. He went so far as to call the president the Hitler of our century. For the average NBA fan with little knowledge of Turkish politics, these statements didn't cause much of a stir at first. But that changed when the consequences of Kanter's activism hit closer to home. His father was arrested and charged as a member of a terrorist organization, which Kanter believed was a false accusation. He also claimed he couldn't contact friends or family in Turkey out of fear their phone lines were being tapped. The Turkish government eventually placed a $500,000 bounty on Kanter's head and also labeled him a literal terrorist, effectively exiling him from his home country entirely. Kanter had always been politically vocal in some way, shape, or form, but things escalated when he turned his attention towards China. After being featured in an ESPN documentary, he openly criticized the Chinese government, referring to its leader as a brutal dictator. The reaction was swift. China banned all Boston Celtic games while Kanter was on the roster. Tensions heightened further after then Rockets GM Daryl Morey tweeted in support of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, which caused massive backlash from China and costed the NBA hundreds of millions of dollars. Kanter continued to speak out on national TV, and by 2022, he was waived and never played another NBA game again. Now that may sound like a clear-cut case of blackballing, and Kanter himself has certainly framed it that way. But to cover the NBA side of the story, it's worth noting that Kanter's media tour was reportedly greenlit by Commissioner Adam Silver, who claimed he'd never intended to censor players for political views. Additionally, Kanter continued to play for a few seasons after his initial comments about China. By the end of his career, though his on-court performance had declined sharply, his defense was so poor it became a running joke, with some comparing him to a traffic cone. So, was Kanter blackballed for his activism? It's possible to likely it even played a part, but it's not definitive. The NBA has previously shown it's willing to sacrifice integrity for business interests. Its handling of the Daryl Morey situation drew bipartisan criticism in the US for appearing to bow out to China. At the same time, Kanter's diminishing value as a player makes it difficult to say whether his politics alone ended his NBA career, but losing out on a fan base that's as profitable as the entire nation of China due to a backup big guy on your bench, the truth to Kanter's fallout of the NBA likely lies somewhere near the middle. If you're watching this right now, there's an 85% chance you're not subscribed to the channel, so make sure to hit that button. We're about to hit 100,000 subscribers, so help us get that before the end of the month. Thanks for watching. Picture this. Before that little light-skinned dude in Golden State literally redefining what a point guard could be, before every young player was chucking up 30-footers instead of doing their layup lines, there was a guard in the 1990s named Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. A man that real ones know was Curry before Stephen Curry. Formerly known as Chris Jackson, he grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi in incredibly difficult circumstances. Without a father in the picture, his mother did her best to provide for the family, but they lived in severe poverty, and on top of that, Chris faced significant challenges in school. He was placed in special education classes for years until he was finally diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome at the age of 17. As a child, Tourette's felt like a curse. He experienced obsessive tics that could completely consume him. Sometimes he couldn't leave a room without flipping a light switch 100 times, or he'd break down in frustration trying to tie his shoes perfectly for 15 minutes straight. But strangely enough, what felt like a curse in his everyday life became a blessing on the basketball court. The obsessive tendencies that came with Tourette's translated into a relentless, almost compulsive work ethic. Chris wouldn't leave the gym unless he swished 10 jumpers in a row. If one even grazed the rim, he'd start all over. These routines led him to spend countless hours perfecting his shot, and by the time he reached high school, he was nearly automatic from anywhere on the floor. His shooting was so consistent that at one practice, he reportedly knocked down 283 straight free throws, forcing his coach to end practice early out of sheer disbelief. I mean, I wasn't there, believe it if you want or don't, but due to a literal mental disorder requiring perfection, this skinny little point guard basically became as automatic as humanly possible. Chris Jackson became a high school legend. Twice named Mississippi State Player of the Year, he averaged 30 points per game as a senior and earned a spot as a McDonald's All-American. That success earned him a scholarship to LSU, where he exploded on the national scene. In just his third college game, he dropped 48 points. By the end of his freshman season, he set the record for the most points in a single game by a freshman with 55, and totaled 965 points on the year, averaging 30.2 per game. In his sophomore season, now sharing the floor with the young Shaquille O'Neal, Jackson still averaged 28 per game, with the Diesel taking up an assload of shots, before eventually declaring for the NBA draft. He was selected third overall by the Denver Nuggets in 1990, and expectations were sky high. One coach even called him a 6'1" Michael Jordan, but Jackson was unlike anyone else. Outside of someone like Trae Young, he might be the only guard who makes sense to compare to Stephen Curry. In an era where off-the-dribble threes were rare, Jackson was using ball screens to pull up from deep in the early 1990s, well ahead of his time. His game was truly unique, and for anyone who watched him play, he was an absolute spectacle. He had quickly proved to the league that he would be a lethal shooter for years to come, leading the Nuggets in free throw percentage year after year, including a season at over 95% from the stripe, and averaging nearly 20 points per game with 7 dimes a game at his peak. He won Most Improved Player and helped Denver shock the top-seeded Seattle Supersonics in the 1994 playoffs, capping off what looked like the start of a Hall of Fame level type trajectory. But just when the world seemed to be there for the taking, everything changed in 1996. In March of that year, Mahmoud sat down for the national anthem before a game, not trying to be all protest-like and dramatic, just sat down quietly. When pressed by reporters, he explained, as a practicing Muslim, he saw the American flag as a symbol of oppression and tyranny, a symbol he personally could not stand for. You can't be for God and for oppression at the same time, he said. He had begun reading deeply from history to his faith and concluded that he could no longer stand for the anthem. His calm words bursted like grenades into the public, causing nationwide backlash. The NBA had enough and acted fast, starting with a 1-game suspension, a fine of about 30 G's, and a difficult decision he had to make: stand for the anthem or sit out for the season. Within days, a compromise was made. He'd stand, heads bowed, eyes closed in prayer. The union supported him, but the league had other plans, stating that players must line up in a dignified posture. He accepted to save his job, but at the point, the damage was already done. What followed looked less like basketball logic and more like corporate containment. He returned to the court under a barrage of boos from the crowds. One fan even yelled racial slurs as he was walking off the court. Meanwhile, his once all-star level talent dropped nearly immediately. Injuries then surfaced. His rhythm was shaky at best. Denver traded away their leading scorer just months after the incident. In Sacramento now, his role shrank fast. His minutes plummeted from 35 to the high 20s, then down to only 17 per game over the next couple years. By 2090, signed despite still being a lethal shooter and playmaker, teams had stopped calling his number. He even tried reaching out, agents asked for tryouts, but he says he was repeatedly told, "We're not interested," and it has nothing to do with his skills. He believes he was purposefully blackballed from the league, a slow fade orchestrated by owners who didn't want to deal with his controversy. Some say comparisons to the NFL's Colin Kaepernick, who now 2 decades later are similar. So much so that Abdul-Rauf warned Kaepernick ahead of time, he's getting ready to get it. History shows anytime an athlete speaks out, you're ignored, discredited, and punished. Off court, the fallout followed him. His dream home in Mississippi was even burnt to the ground. He was receiving death threats, and as the money dried up, he'd lost millions. His marriage ended, and he left the NBA world completely behind in the dust. He played overseas in Turkey, Russia, Italy, Greece, and Japan for years. He made a brief return to the Vancouver Grizzlies in 2001, but played only a dozen minutes per game over 41 games. A sad ending to his final stop in the NBA. He said he's lost his faith in the league's integrity, that they secretly were behind his fall-off to avoid admitting any wrongdoing on their part. And I mean, sounds like something a multi-billion-dollar business would probably do. Don't come after me, Adam Silver, please. Yet through it all, Abdul-Rauf never strayed away from his beliefs. He refused to stand for the anthem, even now, decades later. He says his protest was never about attention. He says his protest was never about money. It was just about being consistent with his faith. In times when NBA stars now wear social justice messages, when the league embraces activism, his story is pretty ironic in an era when the NBA brands itself as the most progressive of leagues, allowing players to speak, protest, and spread awareness to their views. Mahmoud's protest did the exact opposite, as the league literally shunned him down for it. His shooting touch always remained pure, his ball handling was relatively elite, and his basketball IQ was unquestioned. But his career evaporated, not for talent lost, but for controversy earned. His rise and fall played out in real time. A talent taken away too early, a voice silenced before he would be allowed to speak, and a legacy still whispered about as the guard who dared to speak and unfortunately paid the price. Daryl Morey's name might not jump out like a star player's would, but in the NBA world, he was one of the most influential minds. But when he stepped into the political arena, the consequences shook the entire league like a goddamn earthquake. As the general manager of the Houston Rockets, Morey built a reputation for himself for his analytics-driven brilliance, transforming the Rockets into a playoff powerhouse, centered around James Harden's scoring phenomenon. But on a cold October evening in 2019, Daryl was just chilling on his couch, scrolling through Twitter, and decided to make a tweet himself. Little did he know that this would fuck up his entire career with the Rockets with just a press of a button. A single tweet exploded Morey from basketball figure to global political flashpoint. He posted a brief but powerful message in support of Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests, stating, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." At first look, it was just a simple statement of solidarity. But over in China, where the NBA just so happens to have a massive fan base and lucrative business connects, pumping out billions of dollars, it was seen as a diss to them. The reaction was quick and severe. Chinese broadcasters cut away from Rockets games literally mid-game. Sponsors, including major corporations, pulled out of multi-million-dollar advertising deals, and the Chinese Basketball Association suspended cooperation with Houston altogether. The NBA's entire relationship with China, a market worth hundreds of millions annually, suddenly hung on by a thread. The NBA was walking on thin ice, and were desperate to gain the trust back. The league scrambled to contain the chaos in the media. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver defended Morey's right to free speech in a landmark statement. "Our commitment to free expression is absolutely unwavering. This is a fundamental American value, and I think it's an important principle for us to stand for." But Silver also acknowledged the complexity of the situation. "This is a complicated relationship, and we recognize the importance of the Chinese market to our league and to our players." Meanwhile, the Rockets owner was under enormous pressure from the press. He publicly distanced the franchise from Morey's tweets, calling it regrettable, and emphasizing the Rockets' commitment to respecting all perspectives. I mean, you could cut the tension behind the scenes with a knife. Reports surfaced that Morey's position was in jeopardy as the backlash threatened the franchise's business partnerships. Executives and sponsors had caution, fearing the long-term damage to relationships in China, where the Rockets specifically had significant fan engagement and sponsorships due to Yao Ming being an absolute icon to the Rockets and Chinese basketball. Behind the scenes, the political controversy strained Morey's relationship with ownership figures who prioritized business over political statements. Sources revealed that the front office was completely divided. Some supported Morey's right to speak out, while others worried about the financial fallout, while the NBA itself stopped short of officially punishing Morey, the environment became difficult. The team's public silence signaled that Morey's days in Houston were numbered. In January 2021, after months of tension and behind-the-scenes negotiations, the Rockets and Morey's agreed to part ways. They called it a mutual decision, but insiders said the fallout was, of course, the big reason why this all happened. The Rockets wanted to move past the controversy altogether and protect their international business partnerships and all that. And Morey, despite his basketball knowledge, was viewed as a liability to their bottom line. Unlike players like Kanter or Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, whose activism cost them playing time and careers, Morey's story showed that even the league's smartest executives aren't immune to punishment when their political views threaten billions of dollars in global revenue. It forced the NBA to confront the uncomfortable truth that standing for free speech can come at a very real cost. Reflecting on everything that went down, Morey said in an interview, "I never imagined a tweet would have this much impact, not just on me, but on an entire league. But I believed it was the right thing to do." At the same time, Adam Silver himself admitted the leagues underestimated the severity of it all, telling reporters, "We learned a lot about the intersection of sports and global politics, and the risks that come along with it." The situation started massive debates worldwide about athlete and executive activism, the NBA's responsibility, and the limits of so-called free expression. Morey's firing marked a turning point in the NBA, proof that even off-the-court voices have power, but that power can come with major issues to the business side of things. It's just a reminder that the business going on behind the scenes is way more complicated than any of us could comprehend. Craig Hodges entered the NBA in 1982 after being an absolute menace at Long Beach State under coach Tex Winter. A wiry 6'2" guard, he struggled early with his defense but made a reputation for himself among scouts with his elite shooting ability as a young prospect. Over 10 NBA seasons playing for the Clippers, Bucks, Suns, and especially the Bulls, where he earned 2 championship rings and became one of the league's most feared three-point specialists. Between 1990 and 1992, he won 3 consecutive three-point contests during All-Star Weekend. Only other man to do that is Larry Legend himself, so pretty elite company for any shooter. He led the league in three-point percentage twice, proving to the league that he was one of the greatest pure shooters in the entire era. But despite all that, his skill, his shot, his consistency, his NBA career ended suddenly after the 1992 season. And it wasn't because he was shooting bricks, it would be much, much deeper than that. Hodges had become an outspoken activist long before he ever suited up for the Chicago Bulls. Rooted in a childhood shaped by activism, he felt sort of obligated to use his platform as an NBA player for justice and equity. He challenged teammates in league structures, even approaching Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson in 1991 to propose a boycott of Game 1 of the NBA Finals in protest of the Rodney King beating by the LAPD officers. Jordan repeatedly called the idea crazy, while Magic said it was too extreme. Couldn't have been more extreme than all those late night gambling sessions and orgies or whatever the fuck these guys were doing at the time, but regardless. Anyways, Magic was positive this shit wouldn't work out the way that Hodges thought. But Hodges clapped back, saying that the injustices facing black communities were extreme, and it was about time someone stood up and demanded action. But most of the stars remained completely silent about it all, and just left my boy Craig hanging all alone. Following the Bulls' first championship in 1991, the team visited the White House to meet President George Bush. Hodges went along with the tradition, but chose to use it as an opportunity. He showed up not in a suit and tie, but wearing traditional African clothing, walked up to the Secretary of Press, and handed an 8-page handwritten letter to her and refused to bow down before the expectations. In the letter, he addressed unemployment, violence, and neglect of poor and minority communities. Asked President Bush to choose which side of history he stood on, and refused to beg, but he fucking demanded reform. Photos surfaced of him taking a casual shot on a mini court in the White House yard, a symbolic act he later admitted publicly costed him millions of dollars, an estimated $50 million in lost contracts and endorsements to be exact. 10 years into the league, Hodges was nevertheless waived shortly after the championship parade. Dude was probably still hungover, for Christ's sake. The stated reason was Houston's desire to make room for younger players, and that Hodges was nearing 32 and a defensive liability, but no other NBA team called him. His agent dropped him like Leo DiCaprio drops his girls after their 23rd birthday. Former Bulls coach Phil Jackson later said he found it strange no teams ever inquired about him. A Bulls assistant reportedly told Hodges that his outspoken criticism of teammates for refusing to engage in community issues was perceived as attacking Michael Jordan. Hodges sued the NBA and all its teams in federal court in 1996 for $40 million, claiming he had been blackballed due to activism, particularly over his White House protest and public criticism of Jordan and the rest of the league. The case was dismissed, but but the underlying message was crystal clear. Even after being cut, he managed to compete in the '93 three-point contest as a free agent, wearing a basic jersey, no attachment to any organization in the league. He reached the semifinals, but the league's decision to allow him to even be in the contest at all drew even more criticism. Media argued the NBA only relented to avoid hate over why their best shooter no longer had a team. Despite all he had accomplished, 2 rings, 3 shootout titles, league-leading shooting percentages, he never suited up for another team. He spent some time coaching college ball at Chicago State, assisted Phil Jackson with the Los Angeles Lakers, and coached professional teams overseas and over in Canada. But his days in draining triples in the league with ease was completely over with. Over the years, his give-no-fucks attitude remained when it came to his journey as an activist. Being cut didn't hurt my career, it ended a chapter in my life. But my career is advocacy, he stated. People online have debated the fairness of Hodges' departure. Some argued the league bent over backwards to accommodate him over the years, yet when he demanded more, the price was exclusion. One fan said bluntly, teams could tolerate off-court controversies when the player was a superstar, but a bench player that was unwilling to stay quiet was easier to deal with. Hodges' talent goes often unnoticed in recent NBA memory. None of the young hoopers today probably ever heard of the man, which is pretty fucked how the league can almost erase someone from history, even with what he's accomplished on the court. Reality is, he'll probably be overshadowed by his teammates and his off-the-court controversies. Today, real OGs still respect and talk about his 3 consecutive shootout wins, and how he was one of the 2 players in history to lead the league in three-point shooting 3 times. But none of that explains why his NBA career ended so harshly. It was not declining ability, but bold statements of protest that completely crushed it. He also tries to remind young players coming to the league that conscience and basketball can still clash, especially when speaking disrupts and profits of the NBA. His name is tied not just to his underrated shooting records and rings with Michael Jordan, but to a whole deeper story of an athlete turned activist, of a league reluctant to embrace free speech, and of the price paid when talents and truth collide. Royce White was a beast, showing scouts an unreal blend of size and length, pause, and playmaking ability that was unheard of at his size. In the 2012 season, he led the Cyclones at every major statistic, scoring, rebounding, assists, steals, and blocks, something nearly unheard of at all D1 levels. His averages were all around solid, as he hovered around 13 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists per game, and his dominance earned him first-team All-Big 12 honors and the attention of the NBA. Scouts said that his size and skill made him NBA ready, an ideal fit for what at that point was transitioning to a more spaced-out, positionless game. When the Rockets drafted him 16th overall in the 2012 draft, they put all their chips on the table when it came to his potential, but they were also facing a serious challenge. White disclosed to the Rockets that he had generalized anxiety disorder, triggered by flying in team planes. During his college career, he had to pop a few Xans just to get through the flights, which would drain his energy. He made it clear without a travel plan that avoided frequent flights, a full NBA schedule could be too much for his mental and physical health. As training camp came closer, White did something wild. He said he refused to report to camp until the teams agreed to a mental health plan built around his phobia. He has to travel by bus for games within driving distance, offering even to supply and assume liability for his own vehicle to ensure consistency with meals, sleep, and routines essential to maintain his health and conditioning to play his best. The Rockets eventually agreed to limited bus travel and flexibility during the preseason, though it took several weeks to even get that finalized. Beyond the whole travel situation, White and his medical team made a statement to his rookie contract that would treat his anxieties as a legitimate medical disability. That agreement would allow him to consult a mental health professional of his own, someone with authority even over the team's medical staff, to make decisions about whether he could practice, fly, or play. White insisted this was not a privilege but a necessity. Like if he had a sprain or broken bone, only objective medical care could determine his availability. The Rockets couldn't agree to all of that. Granting such independence, they argued, could undermine their medical control, and more importantly, to them, cost way more. By early December 2012, tensions were as high as JR when he fucked up in the finals that time. White missed practices and even media day, stating that each absence was medically necessary for him. The Rockets reportedly fined him each time it happened. On December 29th, the team assigned him to their D-League roster, the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. White refused to even do that, citing that it would involve flying and that the medical independence he insisted on wasn't being taken care of like he asked. On January 6, 2013, the Rockets suspended White indefinitely and without pay for breach of contract, specifically for refusing to provide services, aka show up for practices and games. White fired back publicly, arguing that he was not rebelling, he was managing a medical condition that the team failed to treat properly. He maintained that there was a real risk to his life if mental health couldn't be treated with the same seriousness as physical health does. Rockets GM at the time, ironically, was Daryl Morey, acknowledged that Houston supported White's long-term success, but stopped short on the mental health protocol. 20 days later, after intervention from the NBA and the Players Union, White and the Rockets reached a sort of mutual agreement. His suspension was lifted, fines weren't going to happen anymore, and he agreed to report to the Vipers on February 11th to finally play some ball. The agreement formally recognized his anxiety disorder as a disability, and the team agreed to provide bus travel for approximately 15 road games. White accepted a reduced salary, a loss at roughly like $500,000 to $600,000 due to the delayed season start. On February 12th, White played his first pro game, putting up 8 boards, 7 points, and 4 assists in 18 minutes. Over 12 games, he averaged 10, 6, and 3 a game. A pretty respectable showing and glimpses of solid hustle and skill, as well as the vision he displayed in college. But in March, he announced on social media that he would sit out for the rest of the season, citing it as medical advice from his team, though Houston claimed it had not directed that decision. He said the organization failed to provide true recognition for mental illness and lacked respect for actually how serious mental health should be taken. He never showed his face at the Vipers' postseason celebrations, while Houston went on to win the D-League title while this took place, by the way. His NBA opportunity with the Rockets disappeared like some fucking Zach King trick, and then in August he was traded to Philadelphia as a salary dump for the organization essentially, and then waived before the season even started. In 2014, he signed a 10-day contract with the Sacramento Kings and played just 56 seconds. Not games. This man played 93.3% of a single minute in the NBA across 3 games, missing his one and only shot attempt. To be fair, it's far more than any of us have made with our basketball careers, but that little cameo with the Kings that season was the mark of the end of his entire NBA career, the nail in the coffin. Some fans argued over social media like Reddit, claiming the Rockets bent over backwards for this man, no diddy. They agreed to an unorthodox travel plan for him and managed to let him keep his job for a while despite the high demands. Others saw White as rigid, unwilling to follow even the D-League path once accommodations were in place. One comment echoed widespread frustration. Houston bent over backwards to help this guy and it still wasn't enough for him. Meanwhile, White argued it was never about entitlements, it was about establishing proper protocols for mental health, not just for him, but anyone in the league that felt the stress. He stressed the mental illness should be treated like any other medical issue that athletes face throughout their career. White didn't fade away despite all the backlash and loss of his NBA career. He relocated over to the Great White North to play for the London Lightning in the NBL, 1v1ing polar bears and crossing up beavers or whatever the fuck they do up there. He delivered record-breaking performances, setting a league record with 4 triple-doubles in a season, winning MVP in 2017, leading London to back-to-back championships, and leading the league in scoring in 2018. In one championship game, he posted a stat line with 34, 15, and 9. His stop there, though, ended pretty abruptly, as apparently there was some confrontation between him and the front offices, which ultimately led to his suspension and the Lightning choosing to not even re-sign him. After that, he briefly signed with an Italian team, but never even showed up, and the contract was dropped, I guess. He transitioned into the Big Three and even tried his hand at MMA in 2021, though he lost his debut fight. His post-playing life shifted towards politics. He funded mental health organizations and criticized sports leagues, particularly the NBA, for public statements that lacked any change to the issue. In the aftermath to George Floyd in Minneapolis, he organized protests and criticized institutional responses. 2 years later, he won the Minnesota GOP endorsement and primary for the U.S. Senate, though the competition was kind of slim for the Republican Party in Minnesota. His campaign drew a few endorsements, but it also sparked enormous controversy due to some conspiracies he was going on about. In the general election, he lost by a landslide. Like, picture those Chino Hills days with Alonzo and them and the sorry-ass teams they crushed. It was that brutal. This man tried his hand at a few different careers, and while undoubtedly an amazing athlete, he just didn't agree with how he was being treated and felt he deserved better for his own sanity. And you gotta say, him turning down millions in NBA money to advocate mental health is pretty damn respectable, despite clearly having a couple screws loose. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and as always, I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.